A man who didn't believe in near-death experiences dies and has a miraculous NDE with Jesus himself that would change his understanding of life on earth forever. That and a lot more on this week's Spirit Answers podcast. Well, Brian Hoyland, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today.
Well, thank you for having me.
No, it is totally my pleasure. You have one of the most profound near-death experience testimonies that I've ever heard, and I've had the chance to hear several at this point, through this podcast and also just on my own time. And I'm really, really excited to get into that, and not only the experience itself, but how that changed you and your understanding of things on this side of life and on the other side.
Yeah.
And before we do get into all that, I want to go back to your childhood, because you have a prayer that you pray to God in your childhood that comes back later on during your near-death experience. And I want to go ahead and just start with that. So can you explain to us, what was this prayer? I think you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think you were like 6 years old at the time when
Yep.
you said this prayer. What was this prayer?
Well, the only prayer that I had that was a repetitious prayer was the Our Father. I did pray that, but it was more of just a heartfelt, kind of crying out to God, in a real innocent way. That's all that my prayer was. But it was a long prayer. It wasn't anything that was, anything that I could recite to somebody to say, hey, this is what I had said, and pray this prayer and God will hear you. It wasn't a prayer like that. It was just the heartfelt talking to God as a child.
And didn't this prayer came at a time when someone had passed away recently in your family?
Yeah, my great grandmother had died, and it was the first funeral that I remember going to, that of somebody that I really cared about, that I knew and had a really intimate relationship with. And I saw how everybody else in my family was responding to it, and I just didn't want to die young. And so I had asked God if he would just let me have a long life so that I didn't have to bring sadness to anybody else. And I felt like my prayer was answered. I felt this calmness and peace that came over me. And, at one minute I was in the middle of distress and, sadness, and instantly I just was filled with peace and actually just a calm and comfort, kind of tranquil almost.
Wow. And quite an experience too, for being so young, and for something like that to have that kind of an impact on you. I think that says a lot.
Yeah. And, it's interesting because I didn't even remember this prayer after, all those years. And by the time I got, when I died and re-experienced that memory in heaven, it was an eye opener to me, because I saw how God was with me at different points in my life, that, through time and just getting, more of that distance from those memories, they lose their impact on us. We start to get caught back up in the rest of the world and the distractions of the world. And we forget that God has helped us throughout our lives. And that was just such an eye opener for me, because it really made me realize that even from that very early age, he was with me. And it just unfolded from there, all the different times that he had been with me. And, I often sat around patting myself on the back instead of realizing that I got a lot of grace to get through tough times because of him.
Yeah, I love that, and I'm excited to delve into that a little bit deeper here in a second. So you have that profound moment there at a young age, and we go forward here a few years. If you could kind of give us an understanding on a couple parts of your life before we get into the experience itself. One, kind of what was going on as it relates to your spiritual background. I understand you had a little bit of a background in Catholicism and Freemasonry, and also what was going on from a health perspective at this time. If you could kind of give us a brief understanding of that to kind of set the stage for us.
Sure. Like, you mean like right before I started having medical issues, or?
Yeah, well, that works. Just, I would say whatever it is that you think would be helpful for us to understand just what was going on before you died.
Sure. I grew up as a Protestant, so I was raised as a Protestant. I didn't convert to Catholicism until I was 27 years old. So I didn't convert until later in life, but yeah, I became a Freemason shortly after I became Catholic. I wasn't aware that, as a Catholic, you're not supposed to be a Freemason. I found that out later, that it was putting other gods before our God, putting them on the same level is the same thing as putting them above. So that was a real eye opener for me as well. But I was very strong in my beliefs as a Catholic, but not strong enough to follow them. I was real lazy. I was lukewarm. I didn't, I just didn't practice my faith the way that I should. And the way that I would want to. I look back on it now and I'm really disappointed in things, but I think, that was just me walking without God in my life fully. And, it took this medical thing to really wake me up and make me realize that I'm not strong enough to get through every moment. And it came about in August. It was August 26th of 2016. I'd just gotten home from work and I made dinner with my kids, and my wife had left to go to a girls' weekend at her family's cabin. And so me and the kids were home and we're going to have like a daddy's weekend. And, we had dinner, we played some games that night, and then we went to bed. And in the middle of the night, I woke up and I was throwing up, and it was terrible. I didn't know what was going on. I heard a lot of stories about people having indigestion or some really bad, stomach issues and their chest hurts, and they called 911, and, it seemed embarrassing. So I didn't want to call 911. But then the next morning it still was there, and it wasn't getting better. It was getting worse. So I did call 911, and they came out, they shocked me, they cut my clothes off, the paddles on me. And my kids were watching this the whole time. And it was really traumatic. It was hard to see my kids seeing me in that condition. But the look on their faces really, it broke my heart. And I tried to do everything I could to continue to fight and to try to stay calm. And, but when they wheeled me out, I the last thing I really remember, I was apparently still awake until they intubated me, but I don't really remember a lot of it. And so the last thing I did remember, though, was when I was getting, pushed out on the gurney to see my kids' faces. They were standing in the hallways. I went by. That was really hard. It still is hard to see those faces. But, I got taken to the ambulance and hauled off to the hospital. They called my wife. And a lot of this is, just story that my wife filled in. But, the doctors told her that, he's not going to make it. You need to get here as fast as you can. And when she got there, they already had me intubated, and, I was out, and they were doing a lot of testing and, trying to work on me as best they could. But they told her, after a while, look, you might as well just go home. There's nothing you can do tonight. We'll call you if something happens, meaning that if I died. But that was their prognosis, is that I wasn't going to make it probably through the night, or, much longer after that if I did. But by the next day, I started waking up. And, I wasn't coherent really, but I had started to come through it. All of my organs shut down. They didn't know what was happening, but something with my heart rate had gotten up to over 300 beats per minute. And, when they shocked me, it came way down, but it still wasn't anywhere where they wanted it to be. And they ended up having to intubate me to try to help stabilize it. But all of my organs shut down, my lungs, my liver, my kidneys, everything. And so the next day when I was waking up, they said that was really good. They were really happy. They didn't expect it, but they didn't think that I would be much more than a vegetable for the rest of my life, and I would remain in the hospital. And by that night, I woke up and I made them pull the tube out of my mouth, and, I couldn't really talk still. I wasn't thinking properly as just come out of that. But I was thinking enough to try to explain to them what was going on. So that was really positive. And the doctors just kept saying, wow, this is getting amazing. And I didn't see anything, though. I hadn't any kind of experience. It was just black. I just had no other experience other than waking up and wondering what happened to this amount of time that, it had now been Sunday evening. And, last thing I really remember was Saturday morning. But they ended up telling me the next day what was going on. And so it was a real shock to me. And immediately I just started praying to God. I was like, I can't believe you got me through this. I didn't deserve it. I knew I didn't even really pray before that situation. And I just feel like his hands were on me to keep me safe during that. So then, in and out of the hospital for the next few months. And I mean, I was taking ambulance rides. I've got a stack of those bracelets that go around your wrist when you go into to the hospital. I mean, I was
Wow.
in and out of that hospital so often for the next few years, but those next couple of months were really tough because they were trying to figure out what was happening, but they had no diagnosis. They said, we know you had some myocarditis, but we don't really know what's going on. There's some pericarditis. They were throwing out the diagnoses that they could come up with, but they had no clue what was the cause because they didn't have any of the typical heart symptoms that people have when they have heart issues. So they were looking, but not finding anything. And without finding anything, they weren't able to really treat me. So I kept having these massive heart failure issues. Went to different places around the world trying to get help, and nobody was able to help me. And finally, I went into cardiac arrest in January of 2017. And that night, it was January 15th at about midnight, I started going into heart failure again. And I had a defibrillator, and it wasn't a pacemaker at the time, but it wasn't shocking me. So it wasn't taking me out of the arrhythmia. And I guess I was just below the threshold. So it couldn't actually take me out of the arrhythmia. And so I go into the ER, and they work on me for 7 hours. They're trying to do everything they could to stabilize me. Finally, they get me stabilized, and they thought they could move me up to the ICU. And as they were transferring me to the bed in the ICU, my heart just immediately started rapidly increasing in heart rate, to the point that they called in the crash team. They started calling a code blue. I was sitting on the bed in the ICU, and the only thing I could look at was a crucifix that was on the wall. So thankfully that was there, because it was like a reminder that I still had prayer that I could hold to, because I had nothing else. There was nothing that a human being in that condition has left to do. It's all in God's hands. And it was really apparent seeing him there just looking down on me. And in this room, I could feel God's presence. I knew he was with me. But I finally I gave in. I just said, there's nothing I can do. And I was sick of all the pain and all that suffering that I was going through. And I just said, I'm done fighting. And, I closed my eyes and didn't want to answer any more of the questions. And finally the doctors were like, hey, Brian, we need you to open your eyes. And I said, I'm not opening my eyes. And they said, we need you to answer these questions. And I said, I'm not talking anymore. And it was the hardest thing to get that last little bit out. Took all the last bit of my strength, but I just laid back, and I just was hoping to fall asleep to avoid the pain. But instantly I felt like this pop and this shake, and my soul exited my body.
Wow.
And that pop and that shake was like extremely painful, but it was over just like that. So it's almost as if I experienced no pain whatsoever. And all the pain that I had in the hospital room was gone. All the noise, all that chaos, the anxiety, the worry, everything was instantly gone. And I was filled with just peace and love and joy, and just flooding into my soul. It was just the most wonderful experience to have that contrast between the two. But I was looking at this dark void, and it looked like outer space, but like you see on, pictures, but it didn't have the stars or the planets or anything that you could visually see. It was just blackness, just completely dark. And I was looking at this dark void and feeling this love. And I said, wow, this can't be it. And, that was like the only thought of, a negative emotion that could have possibly came in my mind, was this quick little thought that this can't be it. And I instantly realized I can't be seeing this darkness, because I could see into the darkness. I could see the different layers and depths in the darkness. And I realized I couldn't see that unless there was some sort of light shining in it, which I recognized was shining right behind me. And the reason I didn't recognize it at first is I wasn't aware that I was able to see in 360-degree vision. I was becoming more aware of the different senses and abilities that I had, but having something like that happen and filled with this high level of intelligence and just this clarity in your thinking, my vision, like I said, I was able to see depths in complete darkness and see just the layers of how far you were seeing. And so, I mean, my senses were highly increased, and I could see behind me, and there was this bright light, and this light was clearly and obviously the source of that love and that peace. And it was like just calling to my soul. It was what was feeding my soul with that love, and my soul was just like naturally like impelled towards this light. So I say I turned around, but I didn't really have to turn around. I just changed my focus. My focus now was completely on that light. I could still see the dark void behind me and everything around me, but I was focused on this light. And I said, I want to be with that light. And as soon as I said that, it was like I was there instantly. But what was really cool about this is I could see every single step that I took. I mean, and there was a lot of them, because this light was really far away. But those steps, it seemed like it didn't take me any time to get to that light. And what was really interesting is that I didn't feel any inertia, or I didn't feel any kind of wind flow or anything to give me kind of any kind of idea that I was moving at that rate of a speed. So that to me was really interesting, that I was there in that kind of a that instant, and yet there was all this memory of those steps that I took. But I'm standing before this light. I realized that it's going in all the directions, but I could see I could see super far. But what was really cool about this is that I could visually kind of watch my vision as it was growing. So it was it's getting a mile away, 2 miles away. I'm continually with my eyes, almost as if they were what was going, but I could still see everything else in between. I never lost my vision. I never lost sight of anything. Everything was still within my sight. But I realized with this light, there was something different. I couldn't see to the end of it, and I couldn't see the end of this way or that way or down. I just knew that there was just no use to it, that the light was that immense. And it was just this beautiful, warm, bright light, but it was like alive. The properties of this light is so beyond what I could possibly do justice describing, but it was as if this light was just permeating into my soul. It was pulsating. I could feel it. Like if I would have had a heart, it would have been like beating with my heart, or my heart would have been beating with it. That light was the source of all goodness.
And the only thing that you saw that wasn't that light was that dark void.
Yeah. Yep.
And was that, do you think, was that like the void that transferred you into this area, or what do you think that was?
That's interesting. It certainly is a possibility. And I'll explain more about that when I get towards the end, when I'm going back into my body, because that's actually where the hospital room was when I went back into my body, was where that dark void used to be. Mm-hmm. But the dark void seemed to have more of an essence than, I didn't stick around long to investigate it. And now in hindsight, I kind of wish I would have, but it was as if the dark void was trying to lure me into it. So I didn't feel welcoming. I didn't feel like I should go in there. It felt like I was being told, not to go into that darkness. But like I said, I didn't choose to do that, and I didn't investigate it further. So I can't really say for sure what that was. That's just my opinion.
Sure.
But it felt like I came in from the side of that tunnel that I was in. So it kind of felt like I would have came in from the side of it. But like I said, I don't know, because as soon as I was feeling like I was going to die, I said I wanted to close my eyes and go to sleep. Well, I didn't fall asleep. I did close my eyes. So I actually opened my eyes when I was in the other side. And, so I don't know which way I came in. I didn't watch that, as I left my body.
Yeah. And I'm sure too, it wasn't you had much more appealing things going on around you. I'm sure that was the last thing on your mind was to want to go back and look and explore that.
Yeah, especially with the light. I mean, the light, I can't really describe how this light is you're so attracted to it, because I mean, it's the essence of all goodness, and if you put, an Oreo cookie, I like Oreo cookies, I can put that on the table, but if I had that light, I'm always going to go to the light. If you put $1,000,000 on the table and you have the light, I'm going to always go to the light. There's no option in the world as we know it that would make me want to choose that over that light. So that's just how beautiful and attracting this light was, that it's like your soul feels so drawn to it, so that I didn't want to stick around with that dark void. And it was anything I could do to get to that light. But I do kind of, I have suspicions about it, that people might feel that love of the light, the love of God entering into their soul. And if they're in that dark void, and maybe they're tricked by whatever's in that dark void, and they're lured in because they feel that love and they hear the trick, maybe they go the wrong way because they don't know our Lord, or they don't hear his voice. And I kind of worry about that for people, that I sometimes I get mail, people saying, well, no, you're supposed to go into the dark void, and everything in my being told me not to go in the dark void. And like I said, your intelligence is increased immensely. Like, there seems like there's no limitation to your intelligence when you're connected to God. So you're pure spirit. You don't have the limitations of the body like we do. And so it was obvious that I didn't want to go in that dark void, but I kind of wonder where some of those opinions come from. But I don't know. Like I said, I can only say my opinion, and that's theirs. I just guess that's kind of where I stand on that.
Yeah, and I appreciate you explaining that, because and I think it's also interesting too, that you point out, use the word, it was kind of a seductive uh area over there, and that really is a contrast compared to, it seems like just the purity and the love that you were getting from the light around you. And it just seems like when we view something like that on this side of things, it just reminds me of temptation and those types of things. Just seems
Yeah.
two completely different types of feelings. Even though they're both alluring, we know one of them is not going to be beneficial for us in the long run.
Right. It won't satiate for long. It's
Right.
you're absolutely right. And that's really what it felt like. It felt like I was right, like in the middle of a battle. Like, on one side there was enemy with some evil intent, and on the other side is my protector, trying to fight for me. But I'm laying in that middle of that battlefield, and really all it took was for me to roll over, and I was safe. I was on the good side. But it seemed like that moment, like I could have gone either way. Like, God wasn't going to force me to do anything. The whole time I was there, and this is, I think, a question a lot of people really worry about is, will I lose who I am if I give in and submit to God? Will I somehow become something other than what I am? And I didn't lose any of my free will. I just lost all temptation. There was no temptation, no evil to try to lure me. After I made that decision to go to the light, it was like I was freed from everything.
Wow.
And that was the beauty of it. And I think that's really what God's about, is that he wants us to be with him, and there will be no temptation when we're with him. We don't have to worry about that, but we will have our free will. Our free will just be wonderfully united with him. And how freeing that is beyond compare.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. I really appreciate you clarifying that, and just something that stood out to me when I've heard your testimony before. So, so you had a chance to see that. You kind of go further ahead. You said it was several steps, but time was not the same as it is on this side of things. Uh, so you took these several steps. You have this increased awareness of things that are going on around you. Your senses are going 360 degrees around you. What happens next?
Well, so now I'm looking at this light, and I'm just like in love with this light, just staring at it, and just taking in the kind of, the awe of God. I was just totally in awe of him, just how wonderful he was. And that's when he said that if I wanted, I could come in. So I immediately started walking into the light. And when I walked into the light, it was as if his love flowed into my soul so perfectly and so fully that it was as if I was almost like a funnel or a straw of some sort that, some kind of a conduit that his love was going in and then coming out, going back into the rest of heaven. But I was never depleted. I never was empty of it. It was a constant flow of his love just constantly coming in and just filling me full of him and his love. And while it was happening, it was like he was just shaving off all of these horrible feelings of guilt or shame or anger, was any resentments that I could have possibly had, like attachments to these things that were bad, were just shaved off. Like they were just gone. I had no desire for anything like that. I can't even think that somebody could even want to entertain those ideas. It's almost as if those concepts don't even exist. That's how far removed they are when you're in heaven. So after a little bit of walking there, and I say a little bit, but I don't know how long I was walking. It was longer than a little bit, far as human time goes. But I said, I want to see Jesus. And as soon as I said that, the light opened up into this great room, which was encompassed by the whole light. But there were just a ton of beings in there. And these beings, they had like a human torso, but they were just sparkling light. And I mean, magnificently beautiful. But there was one that was so brilliantly beautiful, just as bright and vibrant as the light that is surrounding us. It's clear that this was Jesus. There was no sign that said, hey, here's Jesus. You just obviously knew. There was no other question. You knew that he was the only one there. That's the only way. And that's why, I say, sorry, I say about my experience that, Jesus is the only one there. It's because it was so obvious that, somebody like me who believed that, other faiths, were going to get to heaven. And, as a Freemason, I didn't believe that there was only one way. And that was completely shattered. And I'm looking at Jesus and I'm saying, I want to see your face. And as soon as I said that I wanted to see his face, his face started to come together. But what was really interesting is that it was like this bright light was what I was able to memorize of his brain or his face, but my brain wasn't able to lay down memory. And I assume that's probably because my brain was still back in in my body, but it doesn't really work like that. It was, it's my soul. My soul was still able to learn. It was, retaining my memories of what I was experiencing at that moment, but it wasn't retaining that memory of his face. And that, I don't know why. I don't know if that was something he prevented me from, but I could see that he was smiling at me and I could see what his face looked like, but I just had no memory to recall from. It was kind of like, those picture books where somebody has a drawing on it and, it's in one position now, and then on the next page is slightly different. And
Yeah.
then you flip through it. It seems like it's moving, but you never have that same image in your mind. It's always this quick snapshot of what's coming next. And that was what it was like. I was like, I had no memory of his face to be able to draw upon, to be able to say, oh yeah, that's Jesus's face. So it was just that bright light is all I was able to remember. But part of me thinks too now that, I don't know if I could live the rest of my life having seen that, because that smile that he had, it was so warm and inviting. Like everything that I experienced, all the suffering that I experienced beforehand was like a happy memory now. And that sounds so crazy, but it was like having experienced that level of suffering made his love fill that hole, that broken spot, and heal it so fully that I wouldn't have probably been able to experience that without that hole there. It had to have that hole in order for him to be able to fill it up with his love. So that was really an interesting part of that healing process that that really still makes me feel wonderful, because I know that there is no negative purposes in life for our suffering. There's always a purpose behind it, a value that will be displayed later we just don't necessarily know the answer to that as we're living.
And
But
and well, I was just gonna say real quick, Brian. I didn't mean to interrupt you there. I was just gonna contrast that between the way that you thought before this experience happened, because I would think before this experience happened, you didn't view suffering like that at all, right? It wasn't something that you were necessarily looking at in this kind of a way that was redemptive.
no, definitely not. And I was like any other human being. I avoided suffering at all costs.
Right.
The only kind of suffering that I enjoyed was working out really hard. It was something that I was imposing on myself, but I knew that the benefit for me was later a stronger me. And
Right.
this was different, where I didn't have to do any action to get strong. I had to submit. I only had to get out of my own way and allow God to work his grace in me. And I was getting stronger.
Wow.
So that was, that it was wonderful to be able to see how just accepting his will, whatever comes our way, and just saying, I surrender to you, Lord, is probably the easiest way we can live our lives. But we often just do the very opposite, and we fail to find his life vest that he throws out to us, in those moments,
Mm,
because we're still trying to do our own way.
mm. Yeah. Um, yeah, really well said. And I also wanted to ask you too, as this is going around, just I haven't had a chance to ask you as far as like, did you have a body at this point? And if so, did it look like your earthly body? And what were the what were the colors that you were seeing? Are you able to explain those in human terms, or is it kind of beyond our comprehension?
Well, I'll do my best to explain it. But as far as the body, that's an excellent question. I really wish I would have looked at my body. I, for some reason, didn't feel the need to look at my body, but I did feel as if my essence was somehow contained in some sort of a structure. But it didn't feel like it was contained in a way that felt at all limiting. I didn't feel pressure of any kind. I didn't feel hot or cold or hungry. I didn't feel thirsty. I didn't feel any kind of, I felt complete contentment. But I did feel like like my soul wasn't just oozing out all over the place. It felt like I did have a being of some sort, but to my own detriment, I didn't bother to look. And I regret that. But it was wonderful to see the other bodies, though. And I think that, I guess I shouldn't probably assume it, but I would assume that mine was like that. Or maybe because I wasn't crossing over, or maybe there's some different rules for what my body would look like. But it doesn't matter, because I didn't bother to look at it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, as far as the colors go, the colors were so vibrant. So when I tell you it looked like pink or green, doesn't mean that it was pink or green. It just means that it was similar to it. But the atmosphere had its own color. Like, you could see everything in the atmosphere everything that was there was connected through the atmosphere. It was like the breath of God. and and it was like a pinkish green, but it was, that's really about the best I can describe of it. But it was alive. It was moving. It had its own living force. And I know it to be the Holy Spirit, but it was as if everything that, like my thinking, it did. Telepathy is a good way of describing it, but it's not even as if it was telepathy. It was beyond that. It was, when I would have a thought, it was like it was in Jesus's mind at the same time. Like, he knew that same thought, where I also had that same ability. I don't think I could have like hijacked his mind, but he opened wide open for me. And so when he was talking to me, it was more of he was thinking, and I was able to know what his mind was thinking.
Wow. Wow. Incredible.
Yeah.
And oh,
And
go
as
ahead.
far as, oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to ask you, just real quick, as it relates to the what you described for the thinking. Did it seem like it was still an audible voice for you, or was it just kind of ingrained? You weren't necessarily hearing anything; you just knew what was being said.
Yeah. I would say it seemed like there was an audible voice, but it wasn't. It was so natural that whatever whatever I'm used to as a human being, it didn't even matter. It was as if this was the obvious, most natural way to communicate. So it didn't seem at all different. It seemed like it was just the most improved way. I mean, I don't know. It was just, you seemed comfortable doing it, you know? So but it, but it seemed just like a normal conversation like me and you are having, but it was just so much more easy to understand, and also to really feel, to, you know, there was no guessing at at what the content was, or the intentions of a particular word were, or definitions, or, you know, any of that. You know, we didn't have to worry about mannerisms or body language. It was so pure, though. It was like I knew exactly what he was getting at. But what I want to say is, like, with the vision, like, I could see around all the objects that were there. So I could see the front and the back of a person at the same time. So there was no limitation as far as that goes either. So, you know, it's like when I was looking at all these people, I could see the front and the back, you know, everything of everybody. So there was that part I thought was really cool too, is that there was just nothing hidden from my view and from my understanding. And because, like, even with my understanding, you know, as I'm staring at Jesus and he's smiling at me, we're reviewing all of my life actions. You know, my whole life is right before me. But it was like, you know, time is so different there. You know, we think of it in a linear type fashion. You know, I was born in this state and went to kindergarten, went to high school, blah blah blah, got married. You know, we look at these events, and rightly so, because that's how we categorize them and organize them. But, you know, when we want to think of a memory, if I want to go back to kindergarten, I had to go all the way back to kindergarten, think about, you know, kind of go off to the side and leave the rest of my memories kind of put off in the back of my mind. It's not that way in heaven. It's like everything is right there, you know, and it's kind of like a pinpoint. You know, you take a pen and you make a mark on a paper. It's like all of time is happening right there in that little mark of time, but it's not confusing. You know, if we were to try to process all that information with our human minds, you might be able to think about two things at once, but it's still going to get kind of jumbled up and get confused. Right. It wasn't at all confusing there. And the part of it is that, you know, you fixate or focus on one particular thing and everything else is in your periphery, but it's so easy to keep it all assembled when you're there. Now, coming back, that's where it gets to be more of a difficulty, because I don't have that level of intelligence. So I can't, you know, recall any of the things that were on the periphery. I have ideas of what they are, but that's where I think people kind of come back and they misunderstand some of the things that they saw, because it seems like they're really, really strong memories, but they're also very blurry compared to the ones that I was really looking at and investigating. So all the different things that I went through, you know, the prayer and things like that, those are more strong, clear memories of my experience in heaven, because those were the things that we were focusing on. But, you know, like your life was there. I didn't know you at the time, so I didn't look at your life in that kind of a way. It was just accessible information that everybody in heaven has. So, you know, that kind of stuff you're not able to bring back. But I think maybe people hold on to some of those things. Say, oh, I was reincarnated because I saw somebody else's life. That must have been something I lived in the past, instead of, you know, just, we have access to God's mind, so we're going to know everything. And all the beings that were there were explaining their lives to me too. And, you know, when I was deciding to come back, I was trying to think of reasons why, and people were explaining to me that, you know, that they had experienced those same kind of concerns in life, you know, things that they were worried about, you know, dying too soon because they wouldn't be able to accomplish things, and how God, his plan is so much better that they have no regrets now. And they see that his plan was better than that they had wanted in their earthly lives. So that was really important, I think, because as I was reviewing my sins, you know, I was instantly feeling that forgiveness just because of the way he was looking at me. His smile is so so warm and full of love that just seeing it makes you feel like these horrible things that you have done are like you're healed for them.
Wow.
Because I think a lot of times we think, you know, oh, it's going to be hard to be judged by God, but we're really hard on ourselves too. And we often fear that we won't be, forgiven because of these horrible things that we've done. And he wants to forgive us. He's waiting for us just to recognize that what we've done is wrong. And that really is what he's waiting for. He just wants to be able to forgive us. But that smile it just speaks to you. You know that he wants to forgive you because you see even what your sin did to him, and yet here he is forgiving you and helping you to heal from that the trauma of that sin too. Because we do a lot of damage to our soul when we sin. We're putting up, like, throwing mud on ourselves and creating a barrier between us and God. And he's there trying to clean it off of us every time and trying to fill us with graces so that we don't fall back into that sin. And the whole time here we are down on earth trying to live our own lives and do our own thing, which is constantly putting more mud on ourselves and keeping us from him. And so that's really what this was like. It was more like he was just cleansing me. And finally, I asked him about that prayer that I had when I was a little kid. And he said that he remembered the prayer and that it still exists, or it still stands, that he was going to stand by that. And he had, said yes, obviously. So now he asked me, why do you want to go back? And so I'm trying to kick it around in my head why I would want to go back. Because there really wasn't anything that I could say, well, I need to go back for my family. And when I said that, he immediately showed me how he's already taken care of my family while I was here, how he was still going to take care of my family. And, and it was an eye opener that God loves my family way more than I do. And that's really telling. And so I knew that wasn't something that I could just go back for just because I wanted to be there for my family and think that somehow I was doing these wonderful things as a father, all on my own. It was always with his help anyway. And so, I started kicking around, I had to go back and continue to be good at my career. And I realized that was just, my own ambition and pride. And so everything I was coming up with wasn't standing. And as I was looking at him, and I just felt this total love for him. And I just said, I know I could do more for you. And that's when he said, yes, that's what you can go back for. And it was this purity. It wasn't like I was wanting to go back to do more for him to get a reward. There was no reward offered. There was nothing I was going to get from this. In fact, he later tells me that it's just, I'm going to have more suffering. But that wasn't why I wanted to go back. It was this just unconditional love for my soul that he had for me, that I couldn't help myself, but I wanted to just do more for him. And so as I said that I wanted to go back for that, he said that I could do that. And he gave me 3 things that I needed to do when I went back. And those 3 things are, he told me to pray more, and then to suffer joyfully, and to share his love. And it's amazing that he did that, because he was telling me that, when he wanted me to pray more, I always thought I was praying enough as it was. But he wanted me to make everything I do a prayer. Even when I wasn't actively praying, if I'm at my job and I'm working on things that don't seem to be related to God, but need to be done, still doing them for God, not for my boss, not for the job itself, not for anything other than that I'm trying to do my place in God's world, always is going to be pleasing to God. Then you throw in there how you're trying to do good for whatever it is your job does do good. You're multiplying that good that you're doing, and and you're not doing evil. You're not doing things that are outside of that. You're putting yourself into some kind of a work. That's a prayer. So you can keep living your life in that way, because we're called to live like Christ. And he told me that being in constant prayer, always having my mind focused on God in some way, is how I'm going to keep myself constantly following in Christ's path. And that's what I need to do. And he said that's how suffering joyfully is done, is that when you're connected to God and you realize that he came down from heaven, took on our form, became man, and then died for our sins, that's a powerful thing to think about. And that's a powerful message for us to follow. And that is a way that we can unite our sufferings with his, and we can maximize them, make them worth something. You know, in this life, we seem to suffer no matter what. I mean, we all are growing older. People are going to have heart issues, and they're going to have, you know, autoimmune diseases that are going to attack their heart, and then you're going to lose your heart. That does happen to people. People are going to get cancer. People are going to get things that happen to them, and they're going to challenge their lives. And through that suffering, though, and just accepting the fact that it is happening to us, but not getting bitter with the fact that I want what's best for me, and I wish this was happening to somebody else. We say, okay, I understand. I'm the one who got it this time, and I'm going to accept it, and I'm going to still love, and I'm going to still show kindness and care for other people, and still live my life for however long I have, doing what is pleasing to God. That's probably one of the most pleasing things we can do in this life. And then sharing his love is constantly putting our neighbors' well-being and getting to heaven, you know, putting that forward, remembering that sometimes somebody might say something rude to us, and the real natural inclination is to defend ourselves and say something back, or to stop them. But, you know, if that's going to be something that's going to cause that person to even step further away from, you know, giving their life to Christ, then I'm going to keep my mouth shut. I'd rather do that and swallow my pride and take one for the team, if you will, because then that leaves that seed there to still be harvested and planted, and, you know, to grow into God's love. But if I disturb that soil, it's not gonna grow anywhere. So I've learned that, you know, sharing God's love is manifested in so many different ways, but it's always putting ourselves into proper perspective and not trying to just be self-centered as we can often find ourselves in this world. So after he told me these things, he told me it was time to go. But as I've started to make my turn to go back, that's the only time in heaven that I felt any kind of discomfort. And it was sharp pains, but it was every time I was getting further away from Jesus is when these pains were just so intense. And I was getting closer to my tunnel, and I could see, you know, at the end of my tunnel, I could see really far, and I could see that it was a long way off, but I could see my hospital room, you know, where my body was. I could see all the medical staff working on me, but behind me, that view of Jesus, I could still see him, but I was, like I said, I was still focused on it, but his was the one view that started to get dim. The more I kept going away, the more I knew I was seeing him, but it was so filled with those distractions that were coming, you know, seeing what was happening in the hospital room. And, you know, I'll describe some of that stuff, but when I was looking at those things, that was taking my attention away from Jesus. And, you know, that's kind of the way that life is that we always are going to have certain things in life that we have to deal with. And each one of them takes us away from Jesus. And that's where he was telling me with that prayer, is to constantly keep him in our mind, because no matter what we're doing, if we're doing it with him also, because he is omnipresent, then we're always going to be in constant union with him. And so that's kind of the goal of my life now, is to keep that constant peace with him. But as I was, you know, walking towards my hospital room, I could see that they had this machine on me that was doing chest compressions. It's called a Lucas machine. They ended up taking it off, and I suspect what was going on is they were about to call me dead, you know, because I had been dead for over 10 minutes at this point. And so I'm getting closer to my room, and you know, I'm noticing where everybody is and what they're doing, and kind of the general look and feel of the room. And then I get to my body, and I didn't have to have anybody tell me how to get into it. I just got right back into my body, and then I popped up, and immediately as I popped up a little bit, you know, I had been strapped down so I wouldn't flop off the bed when they were shocking me, I suppose. But I popped up and I looked at the doctor and I said, "Did I just die?" And he couldn't quite hear me. I had some stuff over my mouth, some oxygen they were trying to pump into me, and so they he had to come down real close to me, and I said it again, and he looked at me like with this look on his face, and he says, yeah, you just died. So, I mean, doctors hardly ever stutter. This guy, his nerves were so raw. I think he just had saw a patient of his die, thought that he wasn't going to be able to bring him back. And then immediately I just snapped back. And I still look at that, and I still like to see his shocked look on his face, because that's how it feels like, I think, with God, is that, he can shock us with these miracles that he does. And so then after that, they had to put in a new defibrillator, but it had a pacemaker with it. The other one was on my side, down kind of underneath my armpit. And so they put this one on my upper chest. But since I was in such a risky condition with my heart, they weren't able to use anesthesia. So they had to cut into me and then put the leads down into my heart. And, as they were doing this, I was still feeling really positive. I just had come back from heaven. I was full of ecstasy and just joy, was permeated into my soul. So it wasn't like it was leaving anytime soon. But I remember just having this wonderful conversation with the doctor. I kind of would have been okay with not having a conversation at all. But I kept thinking, wow, I can't believe this doesn't even hurt at all. I felt a little pinch when they were cutting, but nothing major. And it was really the most mild thing I've ever experienced. And it was because I was just so full of God's love that nothing could get through. And I think, as I look at that, I really want to practice to be able to get back to that. I'm not quite there yet. So, that's just a disclaimer. But I think that it's possible. I think that we all can get that kind of a relationship with God, that kind of closeness. And it's, it comes down to trust. It really is. That's the way to handle suffering is, we have to be able to trust that God has the best for us. It's kind of like when, Jesus was asleep in the boat, and the disciples were all afraid the storm was going to, sink them, and they were all going to die. And these, a lot of these guys were fishermen. They were used to being on the sea. So this storm had to be really terrible. But here's Jesus. He's asleep. He's comfortable. And he wakes up, and he says to the storm, peace, be still. And immediately it's quiet. And I think of our lives like that, and think of the problems that we have that come and go. But, Jesus is there, and he's in the peace, even in those storms. The whole time that I had to go into my heart transplant, which was another 2 years after my cardiac arrest. So I had to go another 2 years with a heart that didn't function. And if you don't have a good picture of it, I'll send you one so you can post that too. Because the devastation that happened to my heart, the doctors pointed out and said, your heart shouldn't have functioned because of here, and here. You had too much damage. Your heart shouldn't have been able to function at all. And so that to me is it. My heart was in God's hands, and he was just keeping me alive, pumping my heart for me. And that's like that storm. It's he's got the peace, and he's there in there waiting for us to just join with him and unite ourselves to whatever may come. But then, you ride out that storm for 2 years, wondering if you're going to get to a heart transplant. And then before you feel like you're going to die again, because that's what happened the day that I ended up getting the call for my heart transplant. I told my mom, I said, I hope I wake up, but I'm going to take a nap. I don't feel good. I think that it's getting really close to the end. And I woke up to the phone call for my heart transplant. And so, it's, it's like sometimes we feel like God isn't answering our prayers, because his time seems to not, correlate with what we have as a time frame. But if he answered our prayers right when we asked him, wouldn't we often think that it was just bound to happen anyway, or somehow we did something that made this new change happen for us? But it's when we give up almost all hope, when we start to get to that point where we say, there's nothing left. It's only you, God. I can't hope for anything in this world to save me from this. You've got to do it. And then all of a sudden it happens. That strengthens our faith in a way that just handing it to us wouldn't do. And that's what I've learned.
Point.
That's how he works in my life. And I am assuming that's how he works in other people's lives.
Yeah, great point. I really like the way that you said that, that there would be something lost there, wouldn't it, if that was the way that it
Yeah,
was? And just a phenomenal testimony. And I just a couple clarifying questions. Um, one, I guess, just like when you come back from something like that, I think about people talking about their lives. Like sometimes, like people will talk about how high school was that was the best time of my life, and then it's gone, and now everything's kind of gone downhill, or it's just not as good as that time was. In a way, people could hear your testimony and say, well, that must have been the best time of your life, when you were dead for that
yeah,
amount of time, and to come back after experiencing perfection and to have to go through everything you just described, just coming back would be tough. And then having to wait 2 years for that procedure. I mean, that had to have been really, really tough. So how were you able to overcome that feeling of, well, I just came out of perfection and now I have to endure living on this, on in this flawed existence again?
yeah. Yeah, well, it sometimes it takes reminding myself that I chose to do this for God, and it only takes me a minute to remember that, because then it automatically makes me remember why I chose to, and it's because of how much He loves me. And whenever I think about that, whenever I think about how much He loves me, I can't help but to think that I could endure anything. It's I read about a lot of Christians who have been martyred for the faith over the centuries, and when you hear about these wonderful examples of strong faith-filled people who died for their God, you know I think about that now, and I'm like, I get it. I totally get it now. Because there's nothing that would sway me from my God, just because of how much He loves me, not for any other reason. It's just that the fact that He loves the way that He loves, that you don't have to worry, you don't have to put up the fears that the world does to us. It'll always tell us that we're not going to make it through things, and that we're never going to be enough, and if we just do this, it'll be so much easier. And it's always trying to tell us to take the easy way out. But really, that way out, is often filled with so much peril and so much disaster, that it never is an easier way. It's always comes with more complications. But but we still kind of get drawn into it. And now it's as if that love just keeps me straight on the focus of Jesus. And I really try to live my life the way that my near death experience was. And it was that constant focus on Jesus. I look at my near death experience, and going from that dark void all the way to my end of my line was all a straight path towards Jesus. There was, I didn't find myself trying to look off for a lot of other things that in hindsight, I would say, oh, I wish I would have had answers to this. But it wasn't like that. I think it was because I didn't believe in near death experiences before this, that I was really more about trying to find answers to the questions that I personally had about the, like just consciousness, things like that. And, suffering was a huge one. Purpose. Those were the things that I was really trying to figure out. And they all lead right to Jesus, every single one. And to me, that speaks more, because now every time I have anything that comes up to me, I just think about Jesus, and I'm like, yeah, you got it. I know you love me. If you want me to have another day's breath, you're going to let me have it, because I went 2 years when the doctors couldn't do anything for me, and He did. So it doesn't shake me at all anymore. And I think that helps. But it's this trust, and I don't know. I know that other people can do this without having to see Jesus. And that's beautiful to me. I'm so drawn to people. A lot of times you see the little old ladies at church. I get drawn to them because they just have this beautiful faith that you can't help but to want to talk to them. And, hey, what prayers are you praying? I want to say some of the same ones you do. And will you pray for me? And things like that.
Mm, yeah, that's awesome. Another question that comes up for me is thinking about who you were before the experience, and as I understand, you were a psychotherapist before the experience, right?
Yeah.
And so I think about that, and um, there's people that are listening to this that may be doing something similar. They're like, okay, well, I'm and I'm in line of work as well as a therapist, and people in my line of work, a lot of times in your line of work, they do feel like they're already doing enough. They feel like, okay, my work, I'm helping people on a daily basis. I think I am doing good things right now. This God thing, I'm not sure about that. Like I'm kind of worried about that, but I feel like what I'm doing for the most part. I live a good life. I'm good enough. Did you get a sense from your experience in heaven as far as like, because I understand you've also said before that when you had a chance to understand how different decisions, you could feel how those decisions impacted people in ways that you can't process maybe on this side of life. So is it just to the extent of people like that, like when they are living their life that way and living their life as far as like trying to help people, but they're not doing enough for God? Is that kind of what you got from the other side, like when you were getting that understanding of how that's impacting the world?
Yeah,
Or what?
yeah, absolutely. No,
Okay.
you nailed it right on. You know, I always held myself to a real high standard, but that was my personal standard. You know, I always said I want to live a life of honor and integrity. So I didn't want to, you know, it's like lying. People will lie. You know, I'll tell my wife sometimes, yeah, I like that, you know, that outfit or whatever, because I know she likes it, but she's going to feel self-conscious if I don't give my stamp of approval. But it's just not my color. It doesn't mean I don't like how it looks on her. It just means I don't particularly care for the color. But that's too much to get into, right? So I'll tell a little lie sometimes. And yet those are still lies, but they're something that, you know, I would have excused, you know, back in the day. But big things, I had real strong lines that I wouldn't cross, you know, and that was always about my honor. So it was still about patting me on the back. It was good. It was good things that the world would say, hey, he's a good man. You know, he's doing all these great things. He's working with populations that are vulnerable and you know, often marginalized and don't receive the kind of care that they typically other populations would get. And people would say, oh, he's a great man for doing that. But partly I like a challenge. That doesn't make me a great man because I enjoy a challenge that in that capacity. But you know, now things have shifted to where I'm looking at what does it take to help a person to be able to be open to getting to heaven. You know, I'm not fooling myself and saying I'm helping somebody to get to heaven. I'm going to help in that process, but I can't do it for them. You know, that comes from grace from God. But I can certainly be a hindrance to that person receiving that grace if I'm doing something negative, and I also can help to smooth that out if I do something positive. So my goal is now is to try to always do what's best for somebody because of God, because it's right with God, not because it's right with me. And that means now that I have to really evaluate what I'm doing and what are my intentions, you know, looking at my heart and saying, am I doing this simply because it makes me feel good, or am I doing it because of a greater reason? And then I can naturally get that greater reason because I'm consciously thinking about it. I still might do the same action, but I'm actually thinking about God as opposed to just thinking about how I'm doing something wonderful and patting myself on the back for it.
Hmm. Wow. It all comes back to that relationship and that trust, like you said, and the
Yeah.
love that comes from that.
And perspective, you know,
Mm.
it's a lot of it is just constantly keeping our perspective on God as opposed to on ourselves, you know. And a lot of times people will say, you know, Buddhists, they're such a peaceful religion and so wonderful and loving, and and it seems all true, but Buddhism is a lot about inner peace, that going into themselves and, you know, focusing on themselves, which comes from a place of self-centeredness, you know, where Christianity is the opposite, is to put ourselves to the side and putting God and our neighbor first. You know, to put our neighbor as ourselves means that we have to wish that our neighbor would go to heaven. That means I have to often sacrifice a lot of things that I would maybe want in order to help somebody get to heaven, because I can't always take the lead on everything. And that's one of the things that I've learned from my experience is that, you know, often I don't try to pick what movie we're going to watch or what we're going to have for dinner, you know, or what's the conversation I'm going to have with a person. I just let it go with the flow a lot of times now, because I don't want to be the one to always control everything, you know. I want to be a little bit more patient and a little bit more humble. and allow other people to have their will take place. And I found that what it does is God opens up more possibilities for me to talk to that person and testify to them than if I'm directly trying to dive in there. And that's been a big help for me, because I used to be the kind of person who would, want to just convince people and say, well, here's the logical conclusion. It's all right here. But that doesn't work. We know that doesn't work for people. It's
Right.
we get caught up in a belief system, and it's often about emotions, not about logic. And you have to convince people that there's something more. And we have logic and emotion. God is love, and it comes with an action and with a feeling.
Mm, yeah. No, one more thing I want to highlight here, and then we can show people where they can find your book and find you on YouTube. Is I just think it's worth pointing out that you, before you had this experience, this wasn't something. It wasn't like you were out searching these types of experiences, like looking into near death experiences. You were actually pretty skeptical of all this before this happened. Isn't that right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
So, oh, go ahead.
I still have watched very few near death experiences. And, I kind of found that even now they don't appeal to me as much, because, I saw Jesus. I mean, I, I actually saw Jesus. So, I don't know what other people saw. I believe they did, because I hear a lot of stories and it's like, well, they clearly saw the same things I did. They're describing it just like I did. So it's not a belief thing anymore. Now for me, it's just because I can go to my memory in my head, and it's better than my real life. So I can sit there and think about that anytime I want. That just is what appeals to me. So I see why people are drawn to these now, but it was my skeptical nature is what kept me away from it. I didn't even give it a fair chance. I didn't even listen to any NDs. I just assumed it was neurotransmitters being released after death. And I just kind of blindly went with what some scientists say, and then I just ignored what the other scientists had to say.
Mm, wow. Um, Well, Brian, this has been absolutely phenomenal, and want to make sure, like I said, people have an opportunity to connect with you. Uh, First, I'll show the book here, "From Sudden Death to Paradise: The Story of a Near-Death Experience," and people can get that on Amazon. And I assume that people can get a kind of more broad and fuller picture of your story.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It goes really in depth with my, all the from the medical issues all the way through to the transplant.
Awesome, and you also have a YouTube channel which I really like, called The Psychology of Heaven with T.S. Dismas, and
Yes.
some beautiful testimonies there that you have. And can you kind of give people an understanding what they can find on your YouTube channel?
Yeah. On this channel, I'm just trying to bring forward messages of hope. People who are going through different things in their lives, having different walks, and finding that their walks with God are bringing more of a similarity. We all have, different paths we take in life, but when we hold on to God's hand, there seems to be a lot of similarities that we have. But it's all of us come to the same generalization that that we all have to have that love and that peace in our lives. And once we find that, our lives can still be magnificent and wonderful, no matter what we've faced.
Hmm. And people can also connect with you on Facebook as well. Just TS Dismas. And again, I'll put all the links below in the description. Um, and Brian, I just want to thank you again for joining us and being so generous with your time and all your insight. And again, just I really appreciate all you're doing for the kingdom. And looking forward to seeing your channel continue to grow, and looking forward to the impact that you continue to make through Christ. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you, Alex. I appreciate it.